Have you ever wondered what's really hiding behind those perfect neighborhoods? The spotless white picket fences, the manicured lawns, and the smiles so polite they feel rehearsed? When I moved to Brookside Hills, I thought I'd found paradise, a fresh start after years of scraping by. But then I uncovered a secret so twisted it didn't just threaten my new home. It put my whole world at risk. How could a place this flawless turn into a living nightmare? Stick with me, and I'll walk you through it. You won't believe what went down. Before we dive in, if you love gritty stories about buried truths and battling for what's right, smash the like button and subscribe so you don't miss a single twist. Now let's get into what happened when I rolled into Brookside Hills. My name is Michael Carter, and the day I pulled into Brookside Hills, my beat-up sedan rattling against the smooth asphalt of the cul-de-sac, I thought I'd finally made it. The neighborhood looked like it had been ripped from a magazine. White picket fences gleaming in the sun, lawns so green they could have been artificial, and houses with wraparound porches that whispered quiet wealth. Kids pedaled bikes in lazy circles. Neighbors waved with rehearsed smiles, and the air smelled faintly of jasmine and fresh mulch. I was 38, single, and fresh off a promotion to regional sales director after years of grinding through late nights and cold coffee. This was my prize, a pristine suburban escape where I could build the life I'd always pictured. I'd spent too long in cramped apartments, chasing deadlines and dodging landlords, to let this slip away. But I had no idea what kind of nightmare was lurking beneath that polished surface, waiting to sink its teeth into me. It started on a Saturday in late June, one of those perfect summer days that trick you into believing everything's going to be okay. I'd invited my younger sister, Sarah, and her two kids, 6-year-old Emma and 4-year-old Liam, over for a barbecue. I hadn't seen them in months, thanks to my insane work schedule and Sarah's chaos as a single mom, juggling a waitressing job and a leaky apartment an hour away in Dayton. I'd spent the morning prepping, firing up the grill, setting up a sprinkler in the backyard, and cracking open a cold IPA as Springsteen's Born to Run crackled through my Bluetooth speaker. The kids' laughter filled the air, Emma shrieking as she dodged water jets, her blonde pigtails bouncing, Liam toddling around with a popsicle melting down his chubby hand, leaving a sticky trail on the grass. Sarah sprawled on a lawn chair, sipping lemonade and recounting her latest dating flop, a guy named Chad who'd ghosted her mid-text after promising a fancy dinner. For the first time in years, I felt grounded, like Brookside Hills wasn't just a house, but a home. I moved here for a fresh start, but it was more than that. Sarah and the kids were my anchor, my only real family since mom and dad had retired south and my college buddies had scattered across the country with marriages and mortgages of their own. I'd always been the fun uncle, the guy who showed up with cheap toys and bad jokes, but now I wanted to be more. This house, with its big backyard and quiet streets, was my chance to give them something stable, a place they could crash when life got messy. That day, watching Emma chase Liam with a water gun, I felt like I was finally getting it right. Then she showed up. I didn't hear Barbara Collins knock at first, not over the music and the kids' squeals, but I felt her presence the second she stepped into my backyard, like a cold wind cutting through the heat. She was a wiry woman, late 50s maybe, with a severe bob haircut, dyed an unnatural shade of blonde and eyes like shards of ice. She wore a crisp blazer despite the humidity, clutching a clipboard like it was her lifeline. I'd seen her around, power-walking the neighborhood in her pristine sneakers, barking at landscapers about uneven hedges, peering over fences like some suburban dictator. She was the president of the Brookside Hills Homeowners Association, a title she wielded like a badge of honor. I'd heard whispers about her at the mailbox, how she'd find a Miller's for planting tulips instead of roses, how she'd cited the Garcias for a basketball hoop the kids loved, but I brushed it off as petty gossip, until she turned those eyes on me. "Excuse me," she said, her voice sharp enough to slice glass. "Are these people registered guests?" I blinked, then let out a chuckle, figuring it was a joke. "Registered? They're my family. My sister and her kids. They're just here for the day." Barbara didn't smile, didn't even flinch. Her lips pressed into a thin, bloodless line. "All visitors must be pre-registered with the HOA office 72 hours in advance. It's in the bylaws, Mr. Carter." Page 17, Section 4, Subsection B. She tapped her clipboard, the sound like a gavel dropping, her manicured nail clicking against the metal clip. I stared at her, my beer halfway to my mouth. You're kidding, right? I don't need permission to have my own family over. Ignorance of the rules isn't an excuse, she snapped. This is your first warning. 3 warnings, and you'll face fines. Significant ones. She ripped a carbon copy slip from her clipboard, her handwriting sharp and precise, and thrust it at me. Before I could argue, she turned and marched off, her heels clicking against the patio like gunfire. The kids stopped playing, their wide eyes darting between me and the retreating figure. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Her lemonade paused mid-sip. Who does she think she is? The Queen of England? She muttered, brushing a strand of dark hair from her face. I crumpled the warning in my fist, forcing a grin to hide the unease creeping up my spine. Just some HOA nutcase. I'll handle it. I didn't know it then, but handling it would turn to a fight I'd never seen coming. A war that would test everything I thought I knew about family, loyalty, and the price of standing up. The warnings started piling up like junk mail, each one a little jab that dug deeper under my skin. A week later, my parents, John and Ellen Carter, drove up from their retirement condo in Cincinnati to celebrate my birthday. Dad, a retired federal judge with a voice that could fill a courtroom and a glare that could melt steel, brought a bottle of bourbon, his favorite, Maker's Mark, the wax seal still intact. Mom brought her famous pecan pie, still warm from the oven, the sweet smell filling my kitchen as she hugged me tight. It was a quiet night. Us on the porch, sipping drinks and swapping stories about my awkward teenage years, like the time I crashed my bike into Mrs. Henderson's rose bushes trying to impress a girl. Dad laughed so hard he nearly spilled his drink, and Mom's eyes crinkled with that soft warmth I'd missed since they'd moved away. Then came the doorbell, sharp and insistent. Barbara stood there, clipboard in hand, her smirk so smug I wanted to wipe it off her face. Unregistered, guess again, she said, slapping a $500 fine into my palm. You were warned, Mr. Carter. Dad stepped forward, towering over her, his bourbon glass still in hand. You're fining my son for having his parents over? What kind of racket are you running here, lady? Her eyes flickered, a crack in her icy facade, but she didn't back down. The rules apply to everyone. No exceptions. Then your rules are garbage, Dad growled, his judge voice kicking in, the one that used to make lawyers sweat. I've seen HOA charters in my day. This stinks of overreach. You'd better hope your paperwork's in order, because I know how to check. She scurried off, her heels clicking faster than usual, but I caught the unease in her posture, the way her shoulders stiffened as she retreated to her black Lexus parked across the street. Dad's words stuck with me, gnawing at the back of my mind like a splinter I couldn't pull out. Was this really just about bylaws, or was there something darker bubbling under the surface? I tried to shake it off, pouring another round of bourbon and forcing a laugh, but the air felt heavier, the night tainted. Things stayed quiet for a couple months, but the tension hung over me like a storm cloud rolling in slow. I started noticing things. Barbara's Lexus creeping past my house at odd hours, its headlights slicing through my blinds. Ted, a wiry guy from the HOA board with a perpetual scowl, lingering by my mailbox like he was waiting for something. Marjorie, a pinched-faced woman who lived across the street, glaring from her porch with her yappy little dog tucked under her arm. Neighbors I'd chatted with at the community picnic, Tom Miller, who'd offer me a beer, or Mrs. Garcia, who'd wave from her garden, started avoiding me. Their polite nods turned into quick glances and hurried steps, like I'd caught some contagious disease. I told myself I was paranoid, that it was just small-town drama blown out of proportion. But the pit in my stomach grew. Then there was Sam Torres, the guy next door. He was a quiet type, mid-40s, with a scruffy beard and a beat-up pickup truck that didn't quite fit Brookside's polished aesthetic. He worked construction, always coming home dusty and tired, but he'd been the first to welcome me, bringing over a six-pack the day I moved in, cracking jokes about the HOA's obsession with lawn height. After Barbara's first warning, he'd caught me at the mailbox, his voice low. Watch out for her, man. She's got a vendetta streak. Fined me $200 last year, caused my truck leaked oil on the driveway. Said it lowered property values. I'd laughed it off then, but now I wondered if he'd seen something I hadn't. One night, I found him on his porch, nursing a beer and staring at the stars. I wandered over, needing a break from the unease chewing at me. "You ever think about fighting back?" I asked, leaning against his railing. He snorted, taking a long pull from his bottle. "Tried once. Filed a complaint about the fines. Next week, they cited me for excessive noise, my daughter's birthday party. Kids with balloons, Mike. They don't play fair. Why do they care so much?" I pressed. Sam's eyes darkened. "Power. Money. Something's off with the books. I heard rumors at the bar. But good luck proving it. They got everyone scared or paid off." His words stuck with me, a puzzle piece I didn't know how to place yet. I thanked him and headed home, but sleep wouldn't come. The neighborhood felt like a cage closing in, and I was starting to see the bars. The breaking point hit in mid-October, a rainy Thursday that turned my world upside down. Sarah showed up at my door that afternoon, soaked and shivering, her dark hair plastered to her face. She was 8 months pregnant, her apartment flooded after a pipe burst in Dayton, and she had nowhere else to go. "I didn't know who else to call," she said, her voice small, her duffel bag dripping on my welcome mat. I set her up in the guest room, grateful for the company. Emma and Liam were with their dad for the week, so it was just her and me. We stayed up late, watching bad reality TV and eating takeout pizza, her laughter easing the knot in my chest. Around midnight, I woke to her shaking my shoulder, her face pale and twisted in pain. "Mike, it's happening. It's too early." Panic hit me like a freight train, adrenaline surging through my veins. I grabbed my keys, threw a coat over her shoulders, and half carried her to the car, her breaths coming in sharp gasps as she clutched my arm. Rain pounded the roof, the windshield wipers slapping furiously as I peeled out of the garage. But then headlights blinded me. 3 SUVs blocked my driveway, their engines idling like growling beasts. Barbara's black Lexus sat in the center, flanked by Ted's silver Tahoe and Marjorie's red Audi. They stepped out, umbrellas up, faces cold and unyielding despite the downpour. "Where's your guest approval paperwork?" Barbara demanded, rain streaking her blazer, her voice cutting through the storm. I slammed the car door, my voice cracking with desperation. "She's in labor. Move your damn cars." "Not without documentation," Ted said, crossing his arms, water dripping from his hood. "Rules are rules." Sarah whimpered beside me, doubled over in the passenger seat, her hands pressed to her belly. "Mike, it hurts." "Move," I shouted, slamming my fist on the hood of Barbara's Lexus, the metal cold and slick under my knuckles. "She could lose the baby." Marjorie smirked, her umbrella tilting as she stepped closer, her voice dripping with venom. "That'd be property damage if you keep that up. Another violation. We could tow your car for that." Rage and fear collided in my chest, a scream building in my throat. I could barely see through the rain and the tears stinging my eyes. Sarah's cries grew louder, each one a dagger in my gut. I fumbled for my phone, dialing 911 with shaking hands, my voice breaking as I begged for an ambulance. "My sister's in labor. Please hurry. They won't let us leave." The operator's calm questions blurred into static as I watched Barbara's smug face, her arms crossed like she'd already won. 10 agonizing minutes later, 10 minutes of Sarah sobbing, of me pleading and cursing, sirens wailed through the rain. Paramedics shoved past the trio, their boots splashing in puddles as they loaded Sarah onto a stretcher. She reached for my hand, her fingers trembling, her eyes wide with terror. "Don't leave me, Mike," she whispered. I squeezed back, promising I wouldn't, even as Barbara and her cronies finally relented, peeling away with sour looks. At the hospital, after hours of waiting and praying in a sterile room that smelled of bleach, Sarah delivered a premature but healthy boy, Noah, after our late grandfather. She cried in relief, cradling him against her chest, but when she looked at me, her eyes burned with something else: betrayal, anger, fear. "How could they do that to us, Mike? To my baby?" I had no answer, just a fire in my gut that wouldn't die, a guilt that gnawed at me for not protecting her better, and a rage that demanded blood. Dad didn't wait for me to ask. The next morning, he stormed into my house, a legal pad in one hand, his old leather briefcase in the other, the same one he'd carried to court for 30 years. "This isn't about bylaws," he said, his voice low and furious, the judge back in full force. "It's about power, and I'm tearing it down." I'd never seen him like this, not since his days on the bench, taking down crooked cops and shady developers with a gavel and a glare. Mom trailed behind him, her face tight with worry, a pot of coffee already brewing in her hands. "She could have died, Michael," she said softly, setting the pot down. "That baby could have," she didn't finish, but the tremble in her voice said enough. Dad set up shop in my dining room, papers sprawling across the table, phone glued to his ear as he called in favors from old colleagues, lawyers, clerks, even a retired IRS agent named Bill who owed him a favor from '98. I jumped in, fueled by guilt over Sarah's ordeal and a growing need to fight back. We dug into everything: public records, HOA filings, financial statements, anything we could get our hands on. Sam Torres came over too, hesitant at first, but when I told him about Sarah, he rolled up his sleeves. "If they're going down, I want in," he said, cracking open a beer and pulling up a chair. What we found wasn't just petty tyranny. It was a cesspool of corruption that made my stomach turn. The bylaws had been rewritten without resident approval. Dates mismatched, signatures forged. Meeting minutes were fabricated, entire votes invented to hide secret decisions. Worst of all, hundreds of thousands of dollars had vanished from community funds, funneled into offshore accounts tied to Barbara, Ted, and Marjorie through a maze of shell companies. They turned Brookside Hills into their personal ATM, using fines and fees to silence anyone who questioned them. We found fake landscaping contracts, $50, $000 for shrubs that never got planted, inflated maintenance fees for a pool that hadn't been cleaned in years, even a kickback scheme with a local developer who'd paid them to fast-track his permits. Barbara wasn't just a control freak. She was a criminal mastermind, and Ted and Marjorie were her eager lieutenants. The deeper we dug, the uglier it got. Sam found an old email from a former treasurer who'd quit 3 years back, hinting at discrepancies before moving out of state. Dad tracked down bank records showing wire transfers to a Cayman Islands account, each one time-stamped after a big HOA emergency fund vote. I stumbled on a stack of fines, hundreds of them, some for things as absurd as unapproved mailbox color, totaling over $200,000 in 2 years alone. It was a machine grinding down residents to line their pockets, and I'd been too naive to see it. Dad took our evidence to Carla Ruiz, the county prosecutor, a no-nonsense woman with a buzz cut and a reputation for hating HOA abuses. She'd grown up in a trailer park, clawing her way to law school, and she had no patience for suburban tyrants. "This is a gold mine," she said, flipping through our files, her eyes glinting. "I've been waiting for a case like this." She moved fast, faster than I'd expected. Within weeks, search warrants hit Barbara's pristine colonial, Ted's gaudy McMansion, and Marjorie's cottage with its rose trellis. I watched from my porch as deputies hauled out boxes of files, computers, even a shredder still warm from use. Barbara shrieked about her rights as they cuffed her, her blazer wrinkled and her hair a mess for once. Ted tried to run, slipping in the mud, while Marjorie sobbed, her dog yapping at the chaos. News vans swarmed the neighborhood, cameras catching every second of their downfall, headlines screaming, "HOA scandal rocks Brookside Hills." The old board was dissolved overnight. Carla's team froze their assets, and the trial loomed like a storm on the horizon. I stepped up with Sam, Mrs. Garcia, Tom Miller, and a dozen other fed-up neighbors to form a new board. We rewrote the rules from scratch, meeting in my living room over pizza and coffee, making damn sure families could visit without jumping through hoops. No more fines for tulips or basketball hoops. No more clipboard tyrants. Barbara, Ted, and Marjorie faced charges, embezzlement, fraud, forgery, and the evidence was airtight. Their empire crumbled, and Brookside Hills started to heal. It's spring now, almost a year since that first warning. I'm in my backyard, watching Emma and Liam chase each other through the sprinkler, their laughter mixing with the hum of cicadas and the distant rumble of Sam's truck pulling in next door. Sarah's on the porch, cradling Noah, her smile soft but fierce, the scar of that night still there but fading. Mom's fussing over a tray of cookies, while Dad raises a glass of bourbon from his chair, his eyes glinting with pride. "To freedom," he says, his voice rough but warm. I clink my beer against it, the cold glass grounding me. And family. The nightmare's over. But I'll never forget how close it came to breaking us. Sarah's cries in the rain, the helplessness in that hospital waiting room, the weight of Dad's hand on my shoulder as we fought back. I won't forget Sam's quiet courage, or the neighbors who finally found their voices. Brookside Hills is mine again, ours again, and this time I'm keeping it that way. No one's taking it from us. Not ever. Lessons learned from the story. This wild ride in Brookside Hills taught me some hard-earned lessons that stick with you. First, never judge a book by its cover, or a neighborhood by its perfect lawns. Things that look flawless on the outside can hide some ugly truths underneath, and it's up to us to dig deeper when something feels off. Second, family's worth fighting for no matter what. When Sarah was crying in that car, and those HOA goons wouldn't budge, I learned that standing up for the people you love isn't just a choice. It's a duty. And finally, power unchecked is a recipe for disaster. Barbara and her crew ran wild because no one questioned them for too long, showing me that sometimes you've got to be the one to say enough and demand accountability, even when it's messy. Meaningful message conveyed. At its heart, this story's shouting a message loud and clear. Don't let anyone, especially petty tyrants with clipboards, steal your peace or your freedom. It's about taking back what's yours when the odds are stacked against you, whether that's your home, your family, or your right to live without someone breathing down your neck. Brookside Hills started as a trap, but it turned into a battleground where courage and justice won out. It's a reminder that even in the cushiest suburbs, corruption can fester, but it's also proof that regular people, armed with grit and a little help from each other, can tear it down and build something better. Hold tight to what matters, and don't back down when it's time to fight. Personal perspective from a story. Looking back, this whole mess with Barbara and the HOA hit me harder than I expected. I moved to Brookside Hills thinking I'd finally found my spot, a place to plant roots and maybe stop running from the chaos of my old life. But when I saw Sarah doubled over in pain, blocked by those smug faces, it flipped a switch in me. I realized I'd been coasting, letting things slide, ignoring the red flags because I didn't want to rock the boat. That night changed me. It made me see that playing nice isn't always the answer. Sometimes you've got to get loud, get mad, and get your hands dirty to protect what's yours. I'm prouder of that fight, standing shoulder to shoulder with Dad, Sam, and the neighbors, than any promotion I ever chased. It's not just a story about a crazy HOA. It's about waking up and owning your life. If this roller coaster of a tale got your heart racing or made you cheer when Barbara's empire came crashing down, then you're going to love what's coming next on Story Precious. We're all about digging into real, raw stories, tales of triumph, betrayal, and everything in between that'll keep you hooked from start to finish. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss a single video. We drop the latest stories hot off the press, and trust me, you won't want to sleep on these. Join the Story Precious crew today, and let's keep uncovering the wild, unforgettable moments that make life worth talking about.